Been waiting all week for that Saturday show. Tune in, see what happened, let your troubles go. Work real hard, now it's time to take it slow. Kick back and relax with that Saturday show.
Good morning, Albuquerque, and welcome back to That Saturday Show, sponsored by the Albuquerque Center for Peace and Justice. I'm Jim Harvey, your host, and we've got a loaded program for you today, so stay in your seats because we've got a lot for you. In the news this week, more on the pushback against the soccer stadium. The lawyer for Avangrid is dismissed, possibly putting the proposed merger with P&M in jeopardy. Palestine and apartheid. So, just what is Q Station? We'll be talking about that today, and so much more. We have a super special guest today in the person of Poet Laureate Hakim Bellamy, who is also the Deputy Director for the Department of Arts and Culture for the city of Albuquerque. Music by the Raging Grannies. I bet you don't know who they are. You're going to be in for a real treat. And before we get deeper in, let me get this off my chest. News arrived this week that a former high-ranking official in city government was fired for whistleblowing on the city's Human Resources Department. It is alleged that there has been a lot of preferential selection of hiring with emphasis on, get this, millennials and friends in high places. It seems that the former director even commented that blacks and Latinos were stupid. The facts are being investigated, department by department, and only time will tell when all will be revealed. It does make you wonder, however, when you hear that 123 black people applied for jobs at the police department and none were hired, just what is really going on? On another front, it seems that the African American Performing Arts Center remains in turmoil as it tries to deal with missing art, the struggles that come from operating on expo property, and a board of directors that doesn't seem to know which end is up. Things won't get better until APAC declares its independence from the always broke expo and gets some qualified leadership. And finally, white privilege at the Olympics? What? Yes, you heard it right. Some poor, misled Polish track runner, a male, had the nerve to demand that a silver medalist female runner, whose time was better than the complaining Polish kid, that she be thoroughly checked to confirm, get this, thoroughly checked to confirm her gender, because he couldn't accept the fact that she ran a better time in her race than he did. You're talking about more than just sour grapes. First of all, let's remember that female runner was a black woman. Then they weren't even in the same race, but more important is that the signs of the time where some white folks are struggling with the skills and resilience of black people is a bitter pill to swallow. And add that he was outdone by a woman. This is a double whammy of white privilege and sexism at the Olympics. Get that. I'm Jim Harvey, and I just had to get that off my chest. All right. We're going to open today with an interview from our View on the Street protest at Q Station. So let's roll that tape.
Nation's weapon will be cool. It's not trendy. It's not cool. Louder. It's not trendy. It's not cool. Nation's weapons will be cool. Louder. It's not trendy. It's not cool. Q Station's
Welcome to That Saturday Show, and this is View on the Street. I'm Jim Harvey, your host. We're talking with Charles Powell, one of the organizers of today's demonstration in front of Q-Town, a front for government recruiting of businesses that will work on building the war machine. Charles, tell us a little bit about that.
Yes, I'm with Veterans for Peace, and Veterans for Peace is made up of mainly military veterans that have served in the U.S. military, but now feel that weapons and violence is not the solution to the world's problems, and often is the cause of the problem. We strongly believe that science and technology should be used for the benefit of people instead of producing weapons and violence against people. And so that's the reason I'm out here today.
Thanks so much, Charles. We're going to wander down this way and get some shots of the marchers. And I see that you've got the Raging Grannies out today.
Yes.
With good anti-war messages, and I think that's great. Thanks again.
All right. Thank you, Jim.
All right.
Great music, Chazz. Great music. Thank you so much for that. I'm going to have to keep that particular song close to me because I really like that. I really, really did. And thank you for that contribution. We are going to take a minute now, after all this serious news, And we're going to go to our good friend Hasani with Good News News. Hasani, what have you got for us today?
Thank you, and welcome to Good News News. I'm your correspondent, Hasani Olujimi, and I'm Gugu for Good News. The goal of this segment is to inspire and uplift you, the viewer, with nothing but good news. Let's jump right in, shall we? Our story reads like this. Realtor transforms abandoned properties into tiny home villages that gives permanent housing to the chronic homeless. A realtor in Missouri is determined to make her hometown a city where no one sleeps outside. For 9 years, Linda Brown and her husband David organized a nightly drop-in shelter where homeless people in Springfield could eat, shower, do laundry, use a computer, and socialize during bingo games and karaoke. But they wanted to do more. So they transformed an abandoned mobile home property into a village of tiny homes that provides permanent housing to the chronically disabled homeless. They raised $4.75 million and opened Eden Village in 2018, erecting 31 tiny homes that are now occupied by people like Jonathan Fisher. He was battling substance abuse and had lived on the streets for 2 years when he met Linda Brown, who changed his life. In the worst moments of my life, Linda gave me guidance, care, and made me feel like I was still worth something, Fisher says. He says that Brown took the time to learn about how he became homeless and then encouraged him to rebuild his life. She even offered him a job. The driving philosophy behind Eden Village is the same that fuels the Housing First movement. The root causes of a person's homelessness cannot be thoroughly addressed until his or her immediate housing needs are met. I watched as my friends, my homeless friends, walked off into the darkness to a hidden, wet, cold camp while we went home to a warm bed. Linda told this to the National Association of Realtors because they honored her with the Good Neighbor Award. Isn't that good news? As we believe here on Good News News, he's not heavy, he's my brother. Well, let's check in with our favorite sassy grandmother, Little Big Mama. What do you have in store for us today, lady?
Hi, Hasani. Thank you, baby. I have a question for your viewers. What did the baby corn say to the mama corn? Where's popcorn? Well, my son a few months ago came home running in the house, slamming the doors, all excited. He told his wife,
Honey, pack your bags. I won the lottery.
and she said, well, should I pack for the mountains or should I pack for the ocean? He said,
I don't care. Just get the hell out.
bye, baby. Bye.
Thank you, Little Big Mama. You're always a blast. The best way to turn a frown upside down is to get Gugu for good news. I'm your correspondent, Hasani Olujimi, featuring Little Big Mama. We'll see you right here next time on That Saturday Show with more good news. Bye.
Words of beauty, words of truth, words that inspire. That's the talent and the gift of Hakim Bellamy, Poet Laureate for the City of Albuquerque and also the Deputy Director of the Department of Arts and Culture for the City of Albuquerque. Yes, he's ours. We have him right here in the city. And after he's done some poetry, maybe we can get him to also share some of the news about some of the arts and culture events and activities that this great city has for the rest of the summer. We give you Hakim Bellamy.
Man, thank you, Jim. I'm going to take you with me everywhere now, huh? 100 Years of Corridos, a song for the New Mexico Centennial. In the first chapter of the Gospel according to Anaya, Rudolfo writes, all of the older people spoke only Spanish, and I myself understood only Spanish in English. Bienvenidos a Albuquerque. I myself only understand English in Diné. We speak many languages but mean the same thing, and mañana will mean more of the same. Familia, food, fiesta, forever. Come on and sing along. We're going to familia, comida, fiesta, forever. For 100 years BC, before the Commodores, before Lionel Richie, and for 100 years more, we have farmed, feasted, and fixed cars. We have moved people and mixed razas. We've got an appointment with the curandera as soon as we leave the doctors, a lust for livestock like chupacabras, afraid of God, and the unexplicable, dinosaur fossils, so in love with space and the people who live there that we speak Chewbacca. The oldest and highest state capital in the country. People on both coasts should look up to us instead of wondering if they have to exchange their money before coming. Yes, dollars is our official currency too. And though we don't have much of it, money can't buy cultura. Our history book, the King Alfonso version, is a canon of wars and peace, a Bible of you and me that was written in Madrid by missionaries and mestizos. We are men of magic and women of wizardry who speak in spell and song, wing words and fly them like a flag, all yellow between red and green like a traffic light. Like the state question is hurry up or slow down, never stop. I lost it. Oh, that's where I finished that. And that's where I'll leave you at. But that poem actually is the first poem that I wrote in 2012 in a book that just got released of mine called Commissions y Corridos. It's a collection of the poems that I wrote during my time as Poet Laureate. And that first poem was actually a poem that I wrote right before I was installed as Poet Laureate in 2012. So you have about 2 years worth of poems in there. Because I'm not the sitting Poet Laureate. Shout out to Mario Ishii. I am the first of 5 poets laureate that this city has. And hopefully we'll be crowning our 6th next year in 2022, if I'm not mistaken. So if you want to hear the rest of the poem, you got to buy the book. It comes out on Saturday or Sunday. This is Saturday, right? So tomorrow on UNM Press, and I hope you check it out.
So welcome back to That Saturday Show. I'm Jim Harvey, your host, and we are now joined by Katherine Hughes-Fraitekh. And Katherine is a member of Jewish Voices for Peace activist. She's an activist there. She's a member. Palestinian human rights activist and a longtime member of Solidarity 2020 and beyond. So you are keeping really busy on this issue, and my hat's off to you. With admiration for all that work. So Katherine, tell us a little bit about your experiences working with some of these organizations.
Sure. Thanks so much for inviting me on the program, Jim. And it's
Absolutely.
great to have your leadership at the Albuquerque Center for Peace and Justice. I've been a long-term member, individual, and members of groups there over the years, so I know how important its work is and just strongly support what you're doing. As far as the work that I'm doing, especially focused on social justice movements and Palestine, Israel, working for human rights for all there. One of the groups I'm working with is Jewish Voice for Peace Albuquerque, and then there's an action aspect which is focused on the 501c4, which allows us to lobby and advocate on legislation and positions of change in policy. And I've been a member of that since I returned to Albuquerque from Washington, D.C., where I've worked for many years, about 3 years ago. And I'm one of the non-Jewish members, and it's an amazing group, an amazingly courageous group of people that are Jewish identified, but are working with a Palestinian-led voice now. They're very careful for that as Palestinians, as the oppressed people in the situation. And they are anti-Zionist, which we can talk about what that means. It's not the same as anti-Semitism, which is sometimes confused. And they are focused on, again, human rights for all in the area of historic Palestine or Palestine-Israel, as we call it today. And so there are a number of different, we've got coalitions that are ongoing. We're doing education for Jewish members. There's a group of Jewish members in the group that are focused on that and working through issues of their families and positions they've had, known about historically and kind of shifting that. And then we have this coalition that includes groups like Albuquerque Center for Peace and Justice. I mean, you've been part of the discussion. Progressive Democrats of America, the New Southwest Coalition of Palestinian Rights that Sami Assad and others are working on, American Friends Service Committee, they've been very active both nationally and at the local level, people in labor unions, and then a lot of churches that are Presbyterian churches, Unitarian Church, friends groups that are focused on, again, trying to follow, what really love and nonviolent resistance and human rights for all means. And so we've done a number of educational series. We just got through with one this summer. We did it all online because of COVID. And we had about 50 people from across the state and even into Colorado that were part of it. Yeah. And so we had a number of issues. We talked about the occupation of the American mind and advocacy, some of the lobbies that are involved, both the Israeli lobby, but also the fundamentalist Christian lobbies. We talked about anti-Zionism is not the same as anti-Semitism and criticism of a state, Israel. We talked about the military occupation and the court kind of the rule of law that has on the occupied territories, where there is no real justice or system of courts for the Palestinians, Palestinian children and what's happening with them, the abuse and torture and detention of many of them. And then we talked about the one state, two state options. So that's, I'll get you started. There's a number of other things that I'm doing with these other groups.
That's a lot. One of the things that you mentioned that I want to really bring up is, I'm glad to know that there are churches involved, because, there are a lot, the white evangelical Christian, so-called Christian movement in this country, has really managed to take sides with and if you will, redefine, what's really happening in the Middle East, and to the point that it's just disinformation and misinformation on steroids. And that's pretty doggone frustrating. And the other thing is, I've noticed that Israel has taken the discussion or debate around Semitism or anti-Semitism and hijacked it. So to the point that we never realized that Arabs are Semites. And so when you get into this business of anti-Semitism, I mean, you really get thrown off. And so changing the dialogue, correcting the information, I think is so important. So I'm glad that you're in this work.
Yeah, well, thank you,
So
Jim.
tell us a little bit about what's going on the ground that you know of over there.
Yeah. So I've been involved now for 33 plus years on this issue. As a young graduate student in Washington, D.C., I was doing my master's in international development at American University and then the Georgetown Center for Contemporary Arab Studies at Georgetown. And I went with a delegation of human rights groups that was led by a Palestinian youth group. And we went and visited Israel, Palestine during the first Intifada. So for people who remember that far back in 1988, it was a nonviolent uprising, 99% totally nonviolent. There was some rock throwing, but it was more symbolic against tanks. We saw the pictures than anything else, but there were school collectives, there were victory gardens, there were no taxation without representation campaigns. They based a lot of what they were doing on Gandhi, on Martin Luther King, on the civil rights movement here, on South Africa, anti-apartheid work. And I just saw an amazing movement that probably, from what I've studied now over 30 years in nonviolent resistance strategies and tactics, it might be the broadest movement that's ever occurred in the modern history. When I looked at Gene Sharp, who was very well known for studying nonviolent resistance and cataloging hundreds of movements over the years, he found, and I found in my master's thesis, that at least 170 out of his 198 tactics and methods have been used or were being used by the Palestinians to try to fight for freedom and justice in their own state nonviolently. Just to give that's where I started. Over the years, I've worked in diplomacy. I worked in the pre-Madrid talks in the White House with the Palestinian delegation. Jim Baker was there, Margaret Tutwiler, and Bush 1 was involved very extensively. Again, trying to go to Madrid and get this two-state option, which really never occurred, because in the end, we know now that Israel is a settler colonial state, very similar to what the U.S. did, Australia did, South Africans tried to do. And the idea was not to go in and occupy and take resources from the land, but to stay. And that's what settler colonialism, you go to a place and you stay there. And they were mainly white, Eastern European Jewish people, many of whom had dealt with the Holocaust, so were coming from very bad situations, and other countries were not taking them. But instead of trying to integrate in the country of Palestine, that was a Middle East Arabic country for thousands of years, with a Jewish population from the area, they tried to take over, and they created their own nation state. So what has happened over the years is there have been a number of so-called peace processes, right? And continual wars started by Israel in 67, 73, 82 in Lebanon, et cetera, and then all the Gaza wars, where they're just continuing to take over the land and the houses and the culture. And so the Palestinians, Christians and Muslims, and an international group have tried to help them resist this, but it, little by little, it has been kind of taking them over. Trump didn't help matters. You mentioned the connection with the white right-hand side and the Christian groups that supported Trump. One of them is Christians United for Israel. They're quite influential and a lot larger numbers in our country than the Jewish lobbyist groups are. And in fact, a lot of Jewish groups are starting to turn away from what Israel's doing, and they don't want the name of the Jewish people connected to a lot of the human rights abuses that are occurring. What's happening now is Palestinian democracy, which they've always been really proud of, even through occupation, has been in tatters. The Palestinian Authority that took over during the Oslo Accord, so for many years, has had an alliance with Israel and the U.S. to keep their own people down. And they've become more and more corrupt, more and more elite. And so they canceled the recent elections that were supposed to be held, and there is no elections that are scheduled in sight. There is Judaization, that Israel calls it, specifically in Jerusalem and East Jerusalem, which was about 90 to 100% Arab, Christian, and Muslim. And now they're trying to take over the whole area. And so under Trump, they became braver. And now they're literally we're looking at thousands of people that will be losing their homes in the Sheikh Jarrah, Shafit. There's a whole bunch of areas within East Jerusalem where the Palestinians live historically, again, 3,000 to 4,000 years, where they're being kicked out and their homes are being demolished and their land is taken. And when they resist nonviolently, they're beaten, they're arrested, sometimes shot and killed. So that's happening. Yeah. Another thing that's happening that people aren't seeing as much about is the Area C, so the West Bank under the Oslo Accords. Basically, there were Area A, B, and C. The A is the big towns like Nablus and Hebron and Ramallah that the Palestinians basically have control over, although the Israelis come and go whenever they want because of this alliance. But Area B is mixed, so it's pretty much Israeli controlled. It's the rural areas. And then Area C is 60% of the whole area. It's the Jordan Valley, a lot of the area around Jerusalem, and that is under Israeli control, even though it's Palestinian occupied territory under law. And so that's being more and more people are pushed off. The farmers are being pushed out. huge villages are being demolished. And then inside 48 Israel, my final point is the Bedouin, who are also Palestinian and who moved around historically, have been put in unrecognized villages, which are just like Native American reservations here. And they have no electricity, no water, even in this age of Israel is such a modern country. And they're now being completely demolished, the houses, the little settlements they've held on to. And so that is also a huge thing that's happening. And then Gaza, which has been bombed. They're not letting in any materials to rebuild. Humanitarian aid is badly needed. People are starving for the first time in a long time. And then the COVID, the medical apartheid, where they, are now in the third one, the shot for Israelis inside their territory, but they've refused to give it to Gaza or the West Bank overall, as has to be done under international law. You have to take care of health needs of the people you're occupying if you don't let them do it themselves. So I'll just put that all forward. A lot is happening, a lot of very sad situations. And it's really one apartheid state. Israel controls the whole area, and it is apartheid. It is very specific rights and differences for the Jewish members of that society versus the Palestinian Christian and Muslims.
Well, they've done a remarkable job operating as hurt people hurting people. All the things that they fled from, all the experiences that they had in Europe. And if you go back even farther in history, they're heaping that same kind of pain and suffering now on the Palestinian people, while continuing to encroach upon their land and their property, by any and all means necessary. And that's a pretty sad thing, They're good at apartheid, operating an apartheid government, and I can understand now how it was so easy for them to support the apartheid government in South Africa. They were big supporters of the South African apartheid government, and that's one of the things that caught my attention many years ago. Leading up to 1967. In fact,
Yep.
And I was pissed. I was so pissed about that. So things have not changed. They've just gotten worse. And I'm glad you mentioned COVID because that's medical apartheid that they're practicing by denying the important testing and drugs, the vaccination to get into the people there. So they're creating medical genocide. In fact. By doing this, and they need to be held to account on that, in the court of human international court of law. In fact, that's what I see that needs to happen there. So you mentioned that JVP and a few other organizations have this bill that's being pushed forward now. Talk to a little bit about that.
Sure. Before we move on, I do just want to recognize that groups like Black Lives Matter, the Red Nation, a lot of Native American Latino groups are really working together in intersectional ways, seeing the similarities of their oppression, and that has really been a huge boost, I think, for all groups. The Palestinians recognize that as quite an important shift in the last several years. And divestment and sanction, because we talked about, you mentioned South Africa, is a really important tactic that they have called for. Hundreds of their NGOs got together in the 90s and said, we see what happened in South Africa. We saw how important it was for international support to shift the power balance in our situation. And we're asking for people to get on board. And so Ben & Jerry's is just one recent example of, again, something that's going positively, that said, we're pulling out of the West Bank, and actually we're probably going to pull out of Israel, although their parent company kind of tamped that down a bit. But there's been a lot of backlash. Again, they're a Jewish company that is looking at wanting to support Palestinian human rights, and then they're having a lot of pushback, but it's been a very brave position to take. and many other groups are doing that as well. So it's not all doom and gloom. It's not looking so good, but there are also amazing things that are happening in the international community and on the ground with a lot of youth movements. So this bill that you mentioned is very important. It's Representative Betty McCollum has co-sponsored it over the last 115th and 116th Congress. Now we're 117. And
Right.
her current iteration is called HR 2590, and it's called Defending the Human Rights of Palestinian Children and Families Living Under Israeli Military Occupation Act. And what's so interesting is McCollum is a centrist Democrat. She's not even a member of the Squad or the she's from Minnesota, which is a progressive space. But she did a UNICEF report many years ago about how the children were being treated there. And she got so upset and so engaged that she said, I don't want the U.S. supporting this. This is not okay with our tax dollars. So legislation. Again, let me just do one quick quote from her. She said, U.S. assistance intended for Israel's security must never be used to violate the human rights of Palestinian children, demolish the homes of Palestinian families, or to permanently annex Palestinian lands. Peace can only be achieved by respecting human rights, especially the rights of children. And this includes the U.S. taking responsibility for how taxpayer-funded dollars is used by recipient countries, Israel included. Congress must stop ignoring the unjust and blatantly cruel mistreatment of Palestinian children and families living under military occupation by the Israelis. The main thing that the legislation calls for is just prohibiting Israel from using U.S. tax dollars. We give them $3.8 billion a year right now in the occupied West Bank and Jerusalem for the military detention, abuse, or ill treatment of Palestinian children in Israeli military detention. And they're the only ones in the world that do this on a continuing basis, that torture and detain and imprison Palestinian children. And then to support, the aid can also not be used to support the seizure and destruction of Palestinian property and homes in violation of international humanitarian law. And the aid cannot be used to extend assistance or support for their unilateral annexation of Palestinian territory. So she's targeting those three areas, which we assume anyone that is church people, human rights people, people that call for fairness and justice, children's rights people, no one in the US or the world, we think, would want these things done by our tax dollars. It's a pretty straightforward ask. And so right now, I can show you a list. She's got over 100 endorsers, which is a huge list of churches and Jewish groups and Palestinian groups, ACLU and AFSC and down the line. She's got about 22 or 23 sponsors. And what we're doing in Albuquerque is calling on our new representative, Melanie Stansberry, who we've had meetings with before she was elected and who told us how much she knows about the issue. She's been in the West Bank and Gaza and in Israel. She saw it during the Second Intifada and the violence that was perpetrated there. And she said, I definitely will support human rights for everyone equally in that area and sign on to bills that are supporting that. So we're just asking her to take the step to sign on to HR 2590 as a sponsor. We think it's a pretty obvious step for her positions and for those of us who supported her. And we have a long list of all of these groups that are national endorsers, but now we're getting local endorsers. So you all have just signed on. Veterans for Peace has just signed on. The Progressive Democrats of America have signed on. Jewish Voice for Peace Action, the Southwest Coalition for Palestinian Rights, the American Friends Service Committee locally, the Friends of Sabeel, a Christian group. We're working on the Working Families Party. We know they support this. And so there are a number of labor unions and others that are all saying, we supported you for Congress and we want you to take some important stand for human rights. And this is one of the things we'd like you to do.
So we've got about 30 seconds left. Time flies when the information is so important. But in that time, is there anything that our viewers, our listeners can in fact do to help push this over the finish line? Our congressional delegation as a
I would
whole.
say definitely get on to Representative Stansberry's her legislative page. There's a place you can put comments and notes, and that's the fastest way to reach her right now. So you can just say, we want you to sign on to HR 2590, supporting Palestinian human rights and families and children. You could call her office. I always use the number. I've worked on the Hill 25 years ago, same number for the general number. So it's 202-224-3121. That can reach anyone. It's not a direct number, but it'll give you to the operators, and you can just say, Representative Stansberry. If you're up north, calling Teresa Leger Fernandez, a representative from the north, she also has not signed on, and we have groups there asking her to do that and trying to, to really push her to sign on, and get involved with our group. Call through, Jim, you could get them connected. You could call or email me, kcelav@gmail.com, kcelav@gmail.com, and I can get you connected to our Jewish Voice for Peace coalition that's working on the issue right now and setting up the meeting with Representative Stansberry.
I'm going to put both of those messages up on our board so that people can see those as they're watching the show as well.
Great.
Okay. So there's so much more that we could cover on this subject. It's one that's been on my radar since, like I said, back in the 60s, when the Palestinian people we speak about international support for the civil rights movement. Palestine was there for the African Americans in the civil rights movement before anybody else was. And I don't want to ever forget that. And the way I can repay, even though we're still struggling as African Americans in this country, we've got enough energy that we can share that energy, with the struggle against apartheid in Palestine as well. Wow, Katherine Hughes-Fraitekh, to be exact. Thank you so much for coming on that Saturday show, and don't be surprised if I give you a call and say, come on, let's do some more of this conversation, because there's so much more that we can talk about. But thank you again.
Yes, thank you. We have a lot of other active members too. So I think any of us would love to talk to you and engage with, people. Again, together we're stronger. As you know, we're fighting great powers out there that have a lot of resources. And the only way we're going to win for progressive values and human rights is to work together.
Let's work together. Absolutely right. Yep. I appreciate you. Thanks again.
Thank you, and to the public, thank you for joining us this evening. That concludes our. Councillor, yes, I'm sorry, Councillor Benson. Yes, before we close, you had a letter that you wanted to read under public comment.
Yeah. And again, I apologize. I couldn't pull this up in time when we had cut short our public comment this evening. This is from Lisa Padilla, the president of the Barelas Neighborhood Association, and this is regarding the stadium project. In the last several days, I have heard from many people who are rightly incensed with the recent treatment of our neighborhoods. I would like to offer you all the chance to make things right with us. We recognize that there is a quickly impending deadline to get this measure on the ballot, and that has dictated to an extent the timeline of your activities. Sometimes when we're in a hurry, we forget to prioritize what is most important. We all do that sometimes. And we here in Barelas hear regularly about how our barrio is the heart of Albuquerque. People come to our neighborhood to feel grounded in our culture and our place. It's beautiful, welcoming, and warm. But we are more than a quaint backdrop. We have a history that is rife with trauma and disenfranchisement. Our heart is at risk. At this crucial moment, with looming gentrification and inordinate impacts, it is even more important than ever to honor and appreciate the injustices and pain Barelas has endured. As we work to uplift, preserve, and fortify what's so precious in this neighborhood, please be mindful of the impacts of your behavior. As we move forward in this process together, we as a city and as a community have the opportunity to implement this process justly in a way that truly centers on our values. We could be an example to other cities in the region and in the world of how to enact a just transition to what's truly important. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing that, Councillor Benton. That was very important. Any questions of councillors? Thank you, councillors. With that, this meeting is adjourned.
Thank you.
And we're back at that Saturday show. And no, we didn't let him get away. We've still got Hakim Bellamy with us. And we just invited him here to the news desk to just share with us today, Hakim, some of the exciting events and things that are happening in the city of Albuquerque.
Sure. Thanks for bringing me over and taking off my poet hat and putting on my bureaucrat hat.
There you go.
My bureau hat.
There you go.
But, today, it being Saturday and all, we do have what used to be called West Side Summerfest, but the events that we're throwing now in the pandemic, because we are still in a pandemic, but the events that we're throwing now, that are just a little bit more, they're all outdoors, they're much more dispersed, a lot less dense, but they've been wonderful. We've done this kind of iteration of Summerfest over the past 3 consecutive weekends, really condensing what was normally a 5, 6, 7 event Summerfest series that we usually span like 3 months into essentially July and August. And so shout outs to the team at the Department of Arts and Culture, particularly the Community Events Division that usually does this work year round for, as the city and the state open back up to have to on really short notice book bands, book food trucks, and kind of have familiar fare that folks will be used to seeing. And the one later today it's shorter. They used to go from like 5 to 10:30 or 11 o'clock. Yeah. 5 to 8 last week in Nob Hill. 5 to 8 was a wonderful event. And it's at Ventana Ranch Park. So those of you who live on the west side,
on the west side,
it's where our department reaches out and tries to provide services and programming on the west side of the city. So that's going to be tonight. That's one of the cool things that's happening. And lots of other, ongoing programming. Our museums are open. Explorer is open during its renovation. The Albuquerque Museum's been open for a large part of the summer, as well as the Balloon Museum, which just opened 2 new exhibits in the past month.
Yes.
And so all of that is open, and it used to be time ticketing in the harder parts of the pandemic. Now folks can walk up and kind of buy a ticket, but we encourage folks to use time ticketing because it might be a thing again in the near future.
One of the things that I really think Albuquerque stands out as a model for the rest of the country is how we have responded to the pandemic. First of all, we're one of those states where we've got almost 70% of the population fully vaccinated.
Absolutely, yeah.
And that's a feather in our cap right there. But then you go to these public events, and I've been to a couple of them this summer already, and the way things are handled there, it's just incredible.
Yeah.
We're talking about responsible and safe, and information is being shared.
Sure.
And those who are unvaccinated are still being encouraged to get vaccinations.
Sure.
And people are right there on the spot that can accommodate you. I think that kind of stuff is, we need to show the rest of the country that we may be a little city, but we've got a big approach with big ideas that work.
Well, we're a leader in lots of these spaces. Our 17 branch, soon to be 18 branch, shout out to the International District Library coming online very shortly. The libraries have been open for a large, maybe that first month of the pandemic was the only time that we were down at the libraries. And that's because many folks get their essential services there. That's where they apply for CARES Act or ARPA relief funding, because that's where they get computer access. That's how they're applying for a lot of state and municipal aid through those portals. And so it was important for us to be open. And your point is well taken. We're not just open to, we're protecting the unvaccinated in our spaces as well by especially in city facilities right now, as of Monday of last week, masks are still required, right, in our indoor spaces. But we've been able to open spaces like the biopark. We've been able to even open our aquarium and some of the indoor spaces at the biopark. Some of you guys like the bugarium, and things like that. And those spaces are open to you in a way that's really forward-thinking to protect both the vaccinated and unvaccinated alike, and mainly to protect. And I have to speak to this as one of the leaders of my department, mainly to protect our staff.
Yes.
Right, mainly to protect our staff. So
yes, and the unvaccinated can do their job and protect the rest of us as well.
Please protect my staff.
You know?
And we've at Summerfest, I will say, we actually have mobile vaccination sites at Summerfest. So if you head out to West Side Summerfest, the pandemic edition, we have vaccination and testing at Summerfest. So that's exciting too. Fantastic.
That's the kind of stuff that we need to happen here, you know. And like I said, the city is just really taking the lead and setting an example. You know, I was concerned about Lollapalooza in Chicago, for example, you know, and they claimed that they were really doing good by requiring masks and also checking to see if people had been vaccinated. But, you know, you're talking about 100,000 people. 100,000 people. How do you police a crowd that size? You know, somebody's going to slip in and turn it into a super spreader event. Yeah. So I just don't know how they did that, but that was a lot of people to try to manage. So we're in a good shape. We're in good shape here.
We're in good shape. It's a good place to be. You know, you saw a lot of reports during the pandemic of folks relocating, which was mainly a function of teleworking, which is maybe a thing we should keep after the pandemic, right? You know, but you saw a lot of those kind of folks who had the opportunity to telework. It's definitely a privilege to be able to telework. But if they could, they were moving to places like Albuquerque. They were moving to places where there was a little space between them and their neighbor because of, you know, an airborne, you know, and they were moving places where living was, you know, affordable, not cheap. We are not cheap, Albuquerque. No, affordable, right? And so these are the kind of, and we have a lot of sunshine and we have beautiful people and good food and all the good things I was poetifying about. Right. But that's what made people want to come here. And I don't know. I think that with the higher vaccination rates, which is a testament not just to the city leadership, you know, shout out to the mayor and all, but it's also to you all who did the things you felt were right for you and your family, who did the things that you needed to do as far as work and school and play and stay, most importantly, staying home when it was required. Yeah.
We're in good shape. We really are. Yeah. And I just have to say again, Hakim, thank you for coming on the show. Thanks for having me. Sharing these important, you know, pieces of wisdom, really, that when you hear about it, it makes your chest swell, because we've got a lot to be proud about, you know, here. Yeah. The weather, the culture, the cost of living, you know, the neighborliness. You know, and so many other things. Well, look, and we have Jim Harvey, of course, and connectivity, right? And so that's what this particular location we're in right now, public access television, is allowing our community to stay connected, to share information with each other during the pandemic, throughout the pandemic, and continuing to do what I think we do best in New Mexico is we tell stories. We are storytellers, and we do it very, very well. All right. Yeah. I'm going to shamelessly thank you again. Thank you. And let's go to our next segment here. More from Chazz, and wishes for a great week.
She leads a lonely life. She leads a lonely life. Well, she woke up late in the morning light, and the day had just begun. She opened up her eyes and thought, oh, what a morning. It's not a day for work, it's a day for catching tan. Just lying on the beach and having fun. She's gonna get ya. All that she wants is another baby. Then she's gone tomorrow. All that she wants is another baby. Hey. All that she wants is another baby. Then she's gone tomorrow. All that she wants is another baby. Hey.
Until the next time, it's time to say goodbye. When you out here in the streets, keep it real, 505. We love everybody, we just want to let you know. Thanks for tuning in to that Saturday show.